the Republican right-wing whack job from, Republican conservative from Utah is lavishing praise on Judge Kavanaugh and talking about how wonderful he is. I'm going to be somewhat biased toward playing the Democrats when they're talking as opposed to the Republicans, simply because this is absolutely unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this, at least certainly not in my lifetime. It has been, well, maybe in my lifetime when I was, 16 years old. It has been 50 years since the swing vote on the court was replaced by somebody who was ideologically definable, right? Clearly definable. And this is something that happens very, very rarely. Usually and part of it is because the judges themselves will resign during the presidencies of administrations that they trust to replace them. So, what you have right now, and this is certainly the case with Kennedy. There's some debate about whether his son, Deutsche Bank, had anything to do with the $1 billion that Deutsche Bank, or piles of money that Deutsche Bank gave to Trump. But, he chose to step down knowing that Trump would put somebody in his place. And Kavanaugh, a couple of things that are not getting anything close to the press that I think they should get. Number one, in 2000, we know that Jeb Bush and Katherine Harris took a list of voter felons provided by the office of George W. Bush, the governor of Texas, took that list of Texas felons and purged it against the Florida database, the Florida voter database, and knocked tens of thousands of Floridians off the voting rolls. Now, why is that consequential? Because there is a much smaller pool of African American and Hispanic names than there are of white names in the United States. There, I guess that's just self-evident. I don't need to explain it. And so when you do that kind of merge purge, and in Texas, a very, very large proportion of the felons in Texas are black. So when you do a merge purge of Texas felons, you're going to get a whole bunch of James Browns in Texas who are also James Browns in Florida, but are not the same person. But Jeb Bush knocked tens of thousands of people off the voting rolls doing this. And got George within 500 votes of being president, at least according to the first count. The state Supreme Court, based on the law, the Constitution of Florida, which says that if a race is within 0.5%, there has to be a mandatory recount. The state Supreme Court ordered a statewide recount, and the U.S. Supreme Court shut it down. Now, what got the U.S. Supreme Court to shut it down, this is when Rehnquist was Chief Justice, was the two clerks who had worked for Rehnquist helped, actually one of them had worked for Kennedy, one had worked for Rehnquist, helped train Ted Olson, the lawyer who argued Bush v. Gore, who went to the Supreme Court and said, no, we've got to stop this. We've got to stop this recount, because we know, a year later when they actually did the recount, they discovered that, hey, Al Gore actually won Florida by any measure. And you can find that in both the New York Times and the Washington Post. It was buried in the 17th paragraph, but it's there. So, it was an illegitimate presidency, George W. Bush. Well, who made it happen? John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh. Brett Kavanaugh played a role in the Bush v. Gore crime. He was 3 years as staff secretary to George W. Bush during the time that they were having debates in the Bush White House about what to do about torture, whether they should continue waterboarding and killing people in order to get information out of them. He was the staff secretary, and that's not a secretarial job. This is a major policy job where he's offering advice to the President of the United States and writing position papers for the President, as well as serving as kind of a nexus for information coming in and out of the White House. He was staff secretary for 35 months, during which we have no documents. There's a 35-month black hole. I believe it was Senator Leahy who pointed this out earlier. They were discussing abortion in the White House. They were discussing torture. They were discussing illegal wiretaps. They were discussing the legality of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. They were discussing all kinds of things that we would like to know what this guy has to say. And the Republicans have chosen to hide those documents and have told the Democrats on the committee, no, sorry, you can't have access to that. 35 months doesn't exist in this man's record. When he was in the role of partisan Republican counselor to a very, very, very illegitimate and under attack is not even quite the right word. George W. Bush, I mean, he committed major war crimes, and he lied us into 2 wars, which are war crimes in and of themselves. And Brett Kavanaugh was right there with him. Is that what the Republicans are trying to hide? Is that why they dumped 42,000 pages last night? You know, they're going, oh, we've got more pages than we've ever had. Well, that's because in this day and age, it's a lot easier electronically to just grab a whole bunch of documents and say, here you go. But the fact of the matter is over 90% of Brett Kavanaugh's record has not been provided to this committee. The White House is asserting executive privilege, except they're not. A lawyer who works for Trump and who is also working for some of the people who have been indicted by Mueller in the Trump scandals has asserted that Kavanaugh's stuff is covered by executive privilege, but Trump has not signed the paperwork for executive privilege. I mean, this whole thing is just so weird. What's going on? The last time a president tried to assert executive privilege was Reagan, and in the hearing on Rehnquist. And Reagan actually did. He actually signed the paperwork and everything. The Democrats sat down with him and said, why are you doing this? This is going to look bad for you. It's going to look bad for us. This is not a good idea. And Reagan backed down. He says, you're right. It should be an open process. Clearly, Trump is not going to do that. Well, actually, Trump hasn't even asserted executive privilege. It's a lawyer who works for Trump who's not even an employee of the government. And finally, when Kavanaugh came before the D.C. Circuit, or came before the United States Senate back in 2006, 7, 8, right around in there somewhere, to have his confirmation hearings to be on the D.C. Circuit, which is arguably the second most powerful court in the United States, he was asked about his time in the Bush White House. And he was asked about what kind of legal advice he offered George W. Bush about his torture policies, about his illegal wiretap policies, about his unlawful war policies. And he said with a straight face to the senators, I had nothing to do with that. I'm paraphrasing, but, you know, that wasn't not part of my purview. And now it looks like he lied. So this guy lied to the United States Senate, the very people who are questioning him right now. And if he didn't lie, why are they covering it up and hiding it? And then finally, in the Garza case, this is the case of the 17-year-old who was held in an immigration facility in South Texas and discovered once she got there that she was pregnant. And she went out and she got funders she found friends and allies who would pay for her abortion, who would take her to the abortion clinic, who would handle the whole process. She took care of it all. And it went before Judge Kavanaugh, Brett Kavanaugh, in the D.C. Circuit. And he asked the question, what's the latest that she can get this abortion? And the defense lawyer, who was speaking on behalf of this young woman, Ms. Garza, said at 20 months, it's illegal to get an abortion in Texas. And so he said, okay, great. She can, and she was 17 months pregnant at that point. So he was like, okay, great. Well, I'm just going to kick this back down the docket. She can reapply at a lower court. That lower court can rule. Then after they've ruled, they can come back to me and say, we'd like you to hear this on appeal. How long is this going to take? Well, 3 or 4 weeks. She's 17 weeks pregnant. She can't get an abortion after 20 weeks. Now, was that because Kavanaugh didn't want to have somebody get an abortion in a case that he was presiding over? Well, he wrote a blistering 65-page defense of his decision when he got overruled by his two friends on the court, was a 3-judge panel. He lost this. But this is what he was trying to do. And there's every reason to believe that this man is on the Supreme Court. You're going to see Roe v. Wade overturned in a nanosecond, in a heartbeat. Sheldon Whitehouse is starting his interrogation, or starting his opening comments.